Welcome, patrons. We continue on with talking about the old gods, this time focusing on the dragon that rose up during the third Blight, Toth, the dragon of fire. The old god. Toth is one of those old gods where we don't really have much to go on, honestly. We know that he was a god of fire. That's kind of all the hard facts we know. Now, in the Chant of Light, the high priest of Toth that broke into the Golden City used the pseudonym Forged Rite of Fire rather than his real name. From this alone, we can take a guess that Toth was perhaps worshipped for the use of his fire during smithing and perhaps other crafts that use fire. He also has a constellation associated with him, and it also happens to be the only one to keep the name of the old god during the years and into modern Thetis. The constellation Toth varies in its depiction, either having a man on fire and a presumed victim of the old god, or a flaming orb. Also, while the name was changed to Ignifir, the new name never actually caught on. From the constellation, which is unusually violent given the other depictions, Toth might have been viewed as more angry and prone to murder than the other gods. What's interesting is that the codex for the constellation Toth says that the man on fire is a victim of the old god, not a sacrifice or killed by another in his name, but rather killed by the old god himself, which also seems to paint him as taking a very active role in humanity. The Archdemon. The Archdemon Toth awoke in 310 Towers, starting the Third Blight. The Blight would take about 15 years and started in central Thetis. The battles of the Third Blight were known to be some of the biggest in history, and the losses were heavy on both sides. Cities in Tevinter and the Free Marches were hit the hardest. In 325 Towers, the Grey Wardens, Tevinter and Orlais met in the Navaran city of Hunter Fell and were able to destroy the Archdemon Toth. We don't know much about the Grey Warden who defeated Toth, other than it was a man and he died doing so. Now, the sword that defeated Toth, as legend states, was broken into 3 pieces during the battle, all of which were left by the Grey Wardens. A woman looking for sign of her son found and sold the pieces to a smith, who then fashioned 3 daggers from them. All 3 is actually obtainable in Dragon Age Origins, called Thorn of the Dead Gods, and each dagger has a higher tier and damage than the next. The legend goes on to say that anyone who has touched the metal has died an untimely death. The woman died of plague, and the smith died by falling into his own forge. I'm not sure if we can really get anything about Toth himself from this, but it does mirror the supposed violence from his constellation. The theory. Now, I mentioned a lot of background information in my video on Andorol, so check that out for more, but in short, there is a theory floating about that the elven gods and the old gods are one, or at least connected to each other in some way. So if this is the case, then what part of the elven pantheon correlates to Toth? Well, here are my best guesses. Selais. Now, I'm sure this isn't the first elven god many of you think of when you hear fire, but let me explain. Selais would be my first choice because unlike the other gods, she is specifically tied with fire first, unlike the others where their ties to fire is actually second. She is the elven god of the hearth and gave the elves fire, along with the domestic arts and healing. Granted, that's the myth. In reality, we don't know what she was like, other than her followers believing her everything to be better than other gods, including her fire. So while her reputation is much softer than Toth's, the fire connection is super solid. Elgar'nan. I'm sure for everyone, this is the main pick for Toth, and for a good reason. I also just think it's almost a bit too obvious, but that's really nothing. But if we're going to get technical, while Elgar'nan is associated with fire, more so than that, he is associated with the sun. He is the eldest child of the sun, and while there are stories of him wielding fire, there are also stories of him wielding thunder as well. The one thing he has over Selais is that Elgar'nan is known for his violence, which we are assuming Toth has as well. Another connection would be that Toth's constellation is also seen as a burning orb, and if the sun isn't a burning orb, I don't know what else it is. Granted, there is another constellation of the sun, so I don't know why Thetis would have 2 sun constellations, but whatever. Janae. While Janae isn't connected with fire so much, he is connected with smithing. Given the title of Forged Rite that the High Priest of Toth took on briefly, I think there is some higher connection to smithing than we might think, so for that alone, Janae would be a good pick. Falun Din. Now this is the dubious one, but I'm trying to mention every small connection I can think of. Falun Din is the elven god of the dead, for the most part. So as Toth has a burning man as a symbol, and a series of daggers made from the sword that killed him and seems to kill its owners, perhaps Toth has a bigger stance on death than we think. And that, dear patrons, is all we know on Toth. Do you still have lingering questions, proof that I'm wrong, comments about your own fan theory? Feel free to tweet me at @Gildathon on Twitter or send a PM to user Gillanon on Reddit. Daresh Shirol. And because apparently I also forgot my last video, Daresh Shirol again.